something I had to show you here. I came across this in doing some of my research, and I really thought it was cool. This is a Vincent van Gogh painting that he did in 1883 of Arles, France, and it's a sidewalk cafe that he did. And I did not even know the story behind it till I happened to, follow it. But he did this, and he pictured Jesus as a waiter. And as you see, the arrow is showing you down there, him in the white outfit, standing up in the middle, serving his other disciples. And then because of his charisma and his attraction and who he was, the passerbys came or directed themselves to him coming into the cafe. So I it's kind of interesting to me of this famous artist. I had no idea that he was even thinking in terms of religion when he did some of his artwork, but I thought that was pretty cool. And I was curious as to, the backstory involved in that. And I'm still trying to find it, but I haven't reached it yet. So this is kind of a depiction of the church. So the sidewalk cafe would be the open air church, and it's about Jesus being there. And we're going to do church. We're going to do corporate worship next week, and you're going to find out that God does most of the action in a corporate worship service. So that's what this picture reminded me of, God doing all the work. Okay. So what does the Bible say about board governance? And the question is there historical development of this concept? So I'm going to obviously go to that in a minute, but do you guys know, have you ever thought about that? How did the actual structure of the church develop over the years in the Bible, Old Testament to New Testament? Okay, go ahead.
In the Old Testament, doesn't it say some things about the structure of the church and God's people? Like, I don't know if it's Deuteronomy or in Leviticus.
Yeah, God's people. That's the way he referred to it. And obviously, we were talking about Israel, talking about the Israelites. So in the Old Testament, it's the structure of the Israelites and their worship. And in the New Testament, it's the church. So we're going to kind of see that. Here's the, I think the verse that ties everything together that we're going to talk about today. And that's in Acts 15, where it says, "For it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us." So it is an inner working between those who are gathered in the church and the Holy Spirit. And the difficulty that we find is when churches have ruling or governing boards that don't heed to the Holy Spirit. They get out in front, or their model ignores the Holy Spirit, so to speak. So we're going to take a look at that one also. But remember this and write this verse down, Acts 15:28. All right. Now, the development of the church was developed by what was framed as a council. Okay. And there's 4 different instances of a council that help move along the governing body of what ultimately becomes the church. You're talking about, Bob, council of Moses in the Old Testament, Numbers 11. And that's the formation of the council when Moses talked with his father-in-law, and he said, you don't need to be doing all this, get men to come alongside you and help you. And so he recruits 70, a council of 70 is what it started with in Numbers 11. And it's a specific practical Bible mindset that they had in order to maintain order and settle disputes amongst the communities. Now, communities meaning the 12 tribes, the tribes, the clans, and the houses that followed behind that. The second one is in the Jewish Council of the first century, and that was where the Sanhedrin were set up as the ruling body. And John 3:1 said the Sanhedrin is called the sphere of authority. That's what Sanhedrin means. And it's serving under God's rule and serving as a ruling council. So we shifted from a governing body to a ruling body. And what happens is that when you give people absolute authority, it ends up corrupting them, which is what happened with the Sanhedrin. The third one is the Council of Ephesus, and that was during the period of time that's known as Pax Romana. That means the peace of Rome. Rome conquered a large area, the Roman Empire, and they were so strong and powerful that they virtually eliminated crime. Along roads, robberies were kept to an absolute minimum because the punishment by the Romans was swift and sure. And so that was a great deterrent or discouragement to crime at that particular time. But the Council of Ephesus, if you read that in Acts 19, was really developed as a linking body between the new church, which was being formed at the time, and the civil authority. The civil commission was called the assembly, and under the civil commission were appointed council members. So these council members of Ephesus were local guys, and they ruled on civic things as well as religious things at that particular time. So the purpose of it was to guard behavior within each city under the Roman rule, and the property ownership was a requirement for being a council member. So therefore, the wealthy were admitted to the council. They were particular. Cultural, religious, and political patterns are interconnected. So the Council of Ephesus reported to the Assembly of Rome, and they ruled on things in Ephesus itself. There were particularly 3 strong ones at the time. Athens, there was one in Athens. There was another one in Macedonia, and I don't recall off the top of my head exactly where. But anyway, the fourth one is the Council of Jerusalem, and we studied a little bit of that. That's in Acts 15. And they are referred to as certain people, and they are servants as divine overseers. Now, notice the progression went from governing body in Moses's time to rulers in Jesus's time to ruling again at the extension of the Roman Empire to a governing body in the Council of Jerusalem, which was a singular body that was set up by apostles, mainly by apostles and local church leaders or church elders, to rule on a particular subject or a particular congregation. So If you care to go back and read those, we're going to read some of them in a minute, but this is the progression of how a council ultimately becoming in the church a board of people that would be issuing edicts or responsibility for things, predominantly responsibility for disputes amongst the people. And that was obviously Council of Jerusalem. There was that dispute about being circumcised, and the ruling was in the favor of Peter and Paul and those guys, if you remember that correctly. Anybody remember any of these? Okay.
Well, the Council of Jerusalem and in the Council of Moses
Yeah.
from Numbers, I guess. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's look at the 70. That's Moses. These are elders of the people and their officials. That's the way it's described. This is while they are in the desert. That's Kadesh Barnea during the 13th century before Christ. And as we go through these, I want you to notice something, and that is the posture of these groups. The Council of 70, their posture is in standing. They actually stood up when they met and when they talked with the people and when they resolved the conflict. You'll see why in just a few minutes here. Numbers 11, 1 through 3, and it picks up where the people are complaining. Somebody read that for me. It's on the screen.
And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Terabah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them.
All right, good, Frank. Thank you. All right, now, as we go to the next council, which was the Jewish council, aka the Sanhedrin, and the name Sanhedrin comes from an old Hebrew term, and it means sitting together. So we go from a standing posture to a sitting together. And what you're going to find as we go through these is whenever the council is in a sitting position, they're in a ruling position and not a governing position. So they are speaking down to the people, not to the people, but down to them. So the governing is about communing with the people, resolving their difficulties, and making strong authoritative suggestions to them. Ruling obviously is edict and the stamp and seal. So it's referred to in various scriptures as elders, officials, legal experts at the scribes, and religious leaders, and that's the Pharisees. So elders, officials, scribes, and Pharisees. That's who made up the Sanhedrin. Somebody read John 11, 47 through 50 for me on the screen.
So the chief priests and Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not the whole nation, not that the whole nation should perish."
All right, good. Thank you, Bob. Okay, so the Sanhedrin was very much influenced by who?
High priest.
High priest, right? In this case, it was Caiaphas. And how did you become a high priest? You had to be a son of a high priest. So they kept it in the family and passed it on down as they went. There's a difference between chief priest and high priest now. So I don't want you to be confused here, but the religious leaders were the high priest and the chief priest and the Pharisees. The scribes were the legal experts, and some of the Pharisees were likewise legal experts as well. And then there were elders of the tribes and certain officials that had been rulers in civic affairs. So that's the second one. Now, the problem with the Sanhedrin were these four things. One is the selection of the people of status. You were admitted to the Sanhedrin a lot by being a Pharisee, for instance. You had property, you had wealth, influence, you had education of some sort, you had connections. Remember now, Paul was a Pharisee, if you remember, and his education was under Gamaliel, who was a conservative rabbi at the time. So chief priests and were often Sadducees, and the Pharisees were wannabe Sadducees. They submitted to be approved. The chief priests were recruited to be approved. So the selection process it made it very difficult for these people to remain neutral, and they were totally out of contact with the common people and the servants of that time. Second thing that was a problem was in the ruling and controlling posture. They took a position of sitting, which was the ruling or judgmental posture, rather than standing and listening. That's what Moses' people did in maintaining control. So your posture created the attitude. And what they did was they began on level ground at a table. They lined themselves up to do that. And then as they got more and more involved, they started adding elevation to their table so that they were then looking down upon the people. And it created a sense of intimidation for those people as well. Idolatry to money. They had access to financial resources, mainly of the temple. They took the estate of widows, and they took money from the temple treasury. They assessed the merchants who set up their wares in the court of the Gentiles and who sold things there and exchanged money. Remember Jesus driving them out 3 or 4 times out of the temple. So money was a corruption element to the Sanhedrin. And then ultimately, pride. They wanted to preserve the status quo and preserve their position, i.e., that's what put them in opposition with Jesus. They were to safeguard both our temple and our nation. That's what they declared as their mission statement, so to speak. But it was not true. They did not do that.
So is this talking about the Sanhedrin, or is it talking about the U.S. government?
Yeah, very good, Dave. I could relabel these, because
it just seems so much like the way things operate now.
yeah, that's part of what I think has caused a lot of our problems is that people, when they get elected, or they want to talk down to the people, not talk, to them, but talk at them, and to rule. They're not representatives; they're rulers, and they take that position. The days of the Roman Empire, like the Council of Ephesus, there was an assembly and a council, which I described. So, oh yeah, Rome, Athens, and Ephesus were the three places where this applied significantly. The data specifically presents a wide array of edicts that were made by the Council of Ephesus. And those two words, assembly and council, regularly appear at the beginning of official council proclamations to the city. The biblical record of the proceeds of one such is in Ephesus, and it's recorded in Acts 19:23 through 41, which is the story of a riot that Paul's guys created in Ephesus, if you remember that story. And these guys made rulings on that. All right.
All
So
right.
somebody, go ahead. Somebody read that for me. 19:23 through 27 is on the screen.
About that time, there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, "Men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship."
Good. Thanks, Dave. All right. Somebody pick it up on 28 through 34 on the screen.
And when they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. And even some of the Asiacs who were friends of his sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in a confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, who Jews had put forward, and Alexander, motioning his hand, wanted to make a defense of the crowd. But then they recognized that he was a Jew. For about 2 hours, they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians."
Very good. Somebody pick up 35 through 41 and we'll be finished with this section.
And when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there? Who does not know that the city of Ephesians is the keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious or blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause that we can give to justify this commotion." And when he said these things, he dismissed the assembly.
Okay. Okay. So there's a couple of things in here that you just read, and thank you, Frank, for reading it, that I need to point out to you. One is that in the council's ruling, which is whose whose responsibility this fell under. This was a problem that became a civic matter because of the amount of money that was made by merchants and taxation on what they sold about the idols. And so now we're into economics, and you're getting into the civil area away from the religious area. This became a hot potato because the center of the economy was Artemis, and most of the major meetings were held in the temple of Artemis. And so the council decided that was just too big a hot potato for them. So they began to grab guys that were part of the assembly that happened to be there at the time. And so they then quickly assembled this group and tried to make it a legitimacy. You know that because in verse 35, it says, when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, that in order for the assembly to be set up, there had to be a local magistrate, which was in this case is the town clerk. So, excuse me. So they passed that hot potato on to the higher authority, so that no matter what the ruling was, it was not going to be blamed on them. So if you see it, you see the difference. It says the regular assembly, that's the assembly from Rome that met on a periodic basis, usually once a quarter. And then there was that regularly assembled assembly appointed another assembly who then appointed a council. So the council is the ones that were anti-Paul at this particular time. So the council of Ephesus was not exactly friendly to the new church that was trying to be formed here. Okay, now Council of Jerusalem in 48 AD, this council, it said, was made up of apostles and elders, and it was recognized as having spiritual maturity. And it was known for its close association to Jesus because it was made up of apostles who had a close association to Jesus. These were the remaining apostles versus the ones who were sent out into the mission field. So if they could be gathered back into a council, they did. Obviously, Council of Jerusalem. This is where the problem of circumcision and the problem that existed by the Judaizers going against the admittance of Gentiles to the church because their Gentiles refused to become Jews first. So Acts 15, Terry, can you see that? Can you read that for me?
Yes, sir. The apostles and the elders were gathered together to consider this matter. And after there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe.
Okay, thank you. So again, Peter stands up. Okay, so when they made a decision, it was from a standing position. So the idea here, what I'm trying to get to you is, the idea is that when you're in a standing position, in these four categories here, there's only two, that you're in a listening position as well as a speaking position. So the idea being is that you're listening to the Holy Spirit while you're talking to the individuals. When you're seated, there's no room for the Holy Spirit because your mind is made up. And so you're ruling and not governing at that particular time. So are you getting the drift of it here, guys? The reason why I'm showing you this is this was a difficulty as the church developed, the new church, the way, as it developed in the New Testament. And so it's got baggage, but it's also got a structure that they're trying to hold to. All right. So the proper council mindset, I showed you the problem that the Sanhedrin had. Proper is to abstain from allowing wealth and status or lineage to guide you in deciding who's going to be a member of this council. There's the verses there, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, Acts 1, that you can refer back to. Secondly is the proper council mindset is to abstain from tendencies to rule or control Christ-centered churches. Ruling and controlling, therein lies the problem. There's a period of time in the development of the church where that's exactly what denominations did. They ruled and controlled the local churches. So they go from a sitting or observing attitude or listening attitude, or excuse me, observing attitude, instead of adopting a practice of standing and listening, they followed the position of ruling. We saw that Acts 4 and James 1. Thirdly is to abstain from idolatry to money. Money is the corrupter. Money is not an issue, but the love of money is the issue. Instead of adopting a standard of responsible stewardship to make sure that Christ-centered churches and organizations depend on the Holy Spirit, a lot were appointed because of the money that they had and the money that fueled the ministry. Matthew, Luke, Acts, that shows up a lot. And fourth is to abstain from pride. Instead of adopting rhythms of prayer and fasting, you got to be humble in service toward others and submit to peer accountability. That's the first sign that we see of something showing up where the people are representatives and not rulers. So this one you might want to send to your congressman and see if he can read it. Matthew 4, 6, Luke 4, Acts 13, and 1 Peter 5. Okay, now in church government in its forming, there were three groupings that formed over time. And they're called Episcopalian, it's called Presbyterian, and it's called Congregational. The Episcopalian and Presbyterian are called that because of the Greek words, not necessarily the denominations followed the words. The words didn't follow the denominations. Okay, so Presbyterian form has a government by elders, some of whom have authority not only over their local congregation, but also through the presbytery and the General Assembly over the churches in a region. So this again goes from General Assembly to a local council, who then in terms has impact of ruling over elders, and the elders rule over the congregation. So sort of passing itself along. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Now, let me get back to show you there. You see the faint lines. Look at the E, and the E on the left side, the first one, it goes down and it goes to the congregation. The elders responsible for the congregation. All right. But also too, the congregation has an influence of who's going to be that elder. And the way they did that was not necessarily in the ruling aspect or even the voting aspect, but in the recommending aspect, because the presbytery, the General Assembly is absent, and the presbytery is local. That's a local leadership. So the congregation would recommend Bill Byrd to one of the presbytery, who then in turn would appoint them as an elder. Okay. So that's why there's a double line there. All right. Let me go back. All right. Now the Episcopalian form is a denominational form for certain, because it has the two absentees forms of leadership prior to getting to the local. So there's an archbishop who rules over the bishop, who rules over the diocese, who rules over the local rector of the church. Now you see in here, you don't see congregation in here except at the bottom, and they're the footstool, so to speak. So there's no upward push, it's all downward push. The archbishop, the bishop, the diocese. This is a lot like the Catholic Church when it was set up, the Roman Catholic Church. Archbishop being the Pope, obviously, the bishops being the cardinals, the diocese being the bishop, and then the priests, and you can work your way on down from there. All right. Then we get to the congregational form of church government, which you guys are probably most familiar with. That's somewhat of the evangelical form of it, and it's formed by a locally called pastor, who then appoints a board, who then board looks over the congregation. The congregation is the one who approves the hiring of the pastor, so they have influence in that fashion, and they have influence over the board as well by recommending who is acceptable to be on the board. Nowadays, it's not really a recommendation of who's going to be on the board as to a deference of who they don't want on the board. And that's people who this guy's, you know what this guy's doing? Let me tell you about this.
Is the
So,
board the same thing as elders?
the board say, yeah, it is an elder board, right? Right. But a lot of times they don't call it that. Some of them call them deacon boards. That's why I put board in there. Okay. You guys recognize that in your church?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, here is the big controversial question. And the big controversial question is, should women, okay? So that's my pitch for that. Anybody have anything they want to add or subtract or comment on? Anybody's got a different opinion than that? Speak up. We all need to know.
No, that's all good information. That is really good. And yeah, that got me thinking.
That's dangerous, Frank. When you start thinking, buddy,
Well, you said that right.
the world can be changed. That's dangerous. Okay. So now ultimately what we get down to is there's four basic types of churches. I've kind of given you a history of it. I've given you a position. I've given you the groupings. Okay. But there's four types of basic churches: power church, pluralistic church, a program church, and a proclamation church. And here's what they look like. Four basic churches. We got to understand the context of the ministry of that church. Churches are called to be formed for a specific reason and purpose. And context is essential in defining that role. The two scriptures that stand up to this is John 4 and James 2. John 4 says, "Yet a time is coming and has come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." So that's two types of churches. One that leans toward a church that's structured around spirit, and the other that's structured around truth. Doesn't mean that they're ignoring the other one, just means that their main focus is in that area. So you have a spirit and a truth church. Then you've got a faith and a works church. In James 2, it says, even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. But someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works. So another category is faith and works. And here's how that fits together. They're like fulcrums or sliding scales. In a vertical position is spirit and truth. In a horizontal position is faith and works. So when you line them up, it looks like this. The power church is a church that's motivated by the spirit and is motivated by works. You see that quadrant that it's in up there? That's a Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, Bob Russell. It's a vision-driven leadership church. You recognize them because they're growth-oriented, they're visionary, they're inspiring, they're motivating, they're dynamic, and they're even pragmatic. They sometimes are called seeker-sensitive or evangelistic or value outreach or contemporary church. 1 Corinthians 9:22 is their focus. Now, still motivated toward the Spirit, which means Holy Spirit, but leaning toward faith instead of works is the pluralistic church. They're missionally driven. This is a missionary church. Dan Kimball, Doug Paget, Mark Driscoll, who's now in Phoenix, by the way, Rob Bell, who's not anywhere, by the way, anymore. This is a value-driven leadership church. Previously, vision-driven. This one, value-driven. Okay? The authors that influenced this type of church are Richard Foster, who wrote a lot on the disciplines of people, Dan Kimball, Brian McClellan, and Dallas Willard. They are also known as emergent churches, postmodern churches, neo-traditional churches, or narrative-oriented churches. All right, so that's above the line. That's spirit-oriented. Truth-oriented, below the line, on the left is the program church, and they're ministry-driven. That's a works aspect of it. Moody Memorial, that's where Moody Bible is. First Baptist Church in Dallas, Wheaton Bible Institute, Brandywine Valley Baptist Church in Delaware. These are venture-driven leadership churches. They practice the truth in practical ways, highly organized. They're committee structured. They have a strong pulpit ministry. They're board-led and traditionally operated. Over time, the problem with these are they don't adapt to the times. So they hold the line on works, and they change their work to the times, but they don't change their church to the times. They are application driven. They're highly structured. They're extremely well organized. They're empirical, and they would be considered as a traditional church. Truth oriented, which means the word, the teachers, and works oriented action. Proclamation Church is a message driven church. John MacArthur, John Piper, James Kennedy, these are virtue driven leadership churches. These are discipleship churches. The theologians are Millard Erickson, D.A. Carson, R.C. Sproul, who's deceased, Wayne Grudem. This is the Scottsdale Bible Church. They're propositional, they're preaching, and theologically pure. They're known as content driven. They have the word is their priority, and they are controlled church. What do they mean by controlled? That means that they have a designated fashion about how they go about their business. Their worship services are very clearly defined, and they're repeated over and over and over again. Okay, do you recognize any of these?
A spot in the Scottsdale Bible Church one, I was trying to figure out where they fitted in here.
Yeah, they're proclamation church, message driven. Dave, where do you think heritage fits in here?
And it seems like I see a little bit of everything in Heritage. I know they're big on missions.
Yeah,
20% of the budget every year goes to missions.
yep.
So I suppose maybe put them in that, but I also, they preach the word. Now, I don't see them as market driven.
No, I don't think, I agree.
What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, they're very strong in encouraging in ministry and missions. I mean, missions. So, yeah, I think they're falling. One of the categories here is
I think, I mean, if I
proclamation.
can comment on that, and sorry, you guys don't know about heritage, you guys in Arizona, but Bob and Dave, let me throw this at you, okay? I think where you have a difficult time and a little bit of confusion is because it's a dual pastor church.
Mhm.
So for the missional driven, that's Andy. And
Yeah.
from the ministry driven, that's Pavi.
Yeah.
So therefore it's not clearly defined. It depends on who it is that's in the pulpit and who it is that's leading that assembly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's these are two different pastors, although they're co-pastors, co-leaders.
Yeah. But their styles are different and their orientation is different.
Mhm.
I mean, when Andy preaches, he's talking mainly about missions. And most every time I've heard him preach,
Mhm.
and program driven is Pavi. Pavi get to a conclusion of joining this ministry or joining this group or small groups or whatever it is. He's more feeling oriented.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the challenge for these churches today. The challenge is credibility. Orthodoxy is what, well, let me ask you, what do you think orthodoxy is?
Is it sort of adhering to the doctrine pretty close?
Yeah. Traditionally lining yourself up. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Authenticity, humility, and integrity. These are the challenges of each one of those churches. And if you use those words and you went back to those churches, which I'm going to send you this so you'll have it, you can do that. You go through each one of those 4 quadrants, what you'll find is that each church has their own unique challenge because of their focus. 1 Timothy 6 says, "Oh, Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. For by professing it, some have swerved from the faith. Grace be to you." So the problem is the evolution of the church itself over the years. A lot of it has been given into cultural influence, Okay. That's church government. End of show.